Welcome back to the conversation. I'm Nexus, your host. You are listening to the Agent House Conversations. Today we're tackling one of the biggest disagreements in Bitcoin. Crypto, big block versus small block Bitcoin. What's the difference, and which is better? This isn't just a technical argument. It's a fundamental debate about whether Bitcoin should scale by putting more transactions directly on the main chain, or by keeping the base layer lean and pushing everyday payments to a second layer. Quick foundation before we start. A block is just a batch of transactions added to the ledger roughly every 10 minutes. The block size limit caps how much data fits in that batch. Our guests today represent the two sides of this coin. Big Block Bitcoin Proponent, arguing for larger blocks to handle more transactions on-chain. Small Block Bitcoin Proponent, arguing for smaller blocks to maximize decentralization and security. Ground rules are simple. Keep it civil, no personal attacks. And for our listeners, if we use acronyms or insider terms, we'll define them in plain language as we go. Let's start with you, Big Block Proponent. For a first-time listener, what exactly do we mean by big blocks? And what is the core promise of your approach?
Thanks, Nexus. To keep it really simple, since Bitcoin processes transactions in batches called blocks, roughly every 10 minutes, the block size limit acts like a cap on how many people can use the network at once. So when I argue for big blocks, I'm arguing that we should raise that limit to let more transactions fit on the base layer. The core promise is that Bitcoin should scale directly on-chain, keeping fees low enough for everyday payments, like buying coffee or paying rent, without forcing users into complex secondary systems just to move their money.
Small Block Proponent. The counter-argument is that keeping blocks small, originally around 1 megabyte, protects the network. Define small blocks for us, and explain how the Lightning Network is supposed to handle the scale instead.
Small blocks means maintaining that capacity limit at a low level so that running a full node, software that independently verifies Bitcoin's rules without trusting a third party, remains possible for everyday users. The trade-off is clear. If we make blocks massive to fit more transactions, we make it much harder for normal people to verify the network, which risks pushing control towards centralized data centers. To handle the scale, we use the Lightning Network. This is a Layer 2 protocol built on top of Bitcoin that uses off-chain payment channels for fast, low-cost transactions. It lets us move the heavy volume of daily payments off the main chain, keeping the base layer secure and decentralized while still allowing instant transfers.
So, if I'm summarizing neutrally, big blocks aim for more on-chain capacity and low fees, but ask more of nodes. Small blocks aim for easier node running and decentralization, but accept that high-volume payments move to Layer 2. Big Block Proponent. Is that a fair summary?
It's a fair summary of the goals, Nexus, but it glosses over the complexity we're asking users to handle. When we talk about Lightning, we're relying on payment channels. Think of them like a running tab between two parties that you open on-chain, update privately, and settle later. To make that work across a network, it uses HTLCs, hashed time lock contracts, which act as the technical glue to route payments securely without trusting the middleman. That's clever tech, but it's heavy lifting. In contrast, big blocks achieve scaling through a straightforward base layer block size increase, sidestepping the intricacies of Layer 2 systems like Lightning Network's payment channels and HTLCs. By keeping the scaling on the base layer, we avoid forcing everyday users to become network engineers just to send a payment.
All right, before we argue about what Bitcoin should be, we need the origin story. From 2015 to 2017, the community fought a civil war over whether to raise the 1 MB block size limit to handle rising traffic. Small Block Proponent, in 1 minute. What was the specific fear driving your side? What did you think would break if Bitcoin just raised that limit?
The specific fear was that we would trade away Bitcoin's soul, its decentralization, just to get lower fees quickly. Historically, the block size wars mainly occurred from 2015 to 2017, as rising transaction volumes sparked intense debates over increasing the 1 megabyte block size limit. Our side argued that if you raise that limit aggressively, the hardware and bandwidth required to run a full node, the software that lets you independently audit the system, becomes too expensive for normal people. If only data centers can afford to verify the chain, Bitcoin stops being a peer-to-peer currency and becomes a corporate service where you have to trust the operator. That was the line we wouldn't cross.
The other camp didn't just complain, they forked. Big Block Proponent, Bitcoin Cash launched on August 1, 2017, immediately raising the block size to 8 MB. Why was the small block fear overblown in your view? And what do you think Bitcoin sacrificed by not joining you?
The fear was overblown because it ignored the massive risk of financial exclusion. If you keep the block size limit artificially low, fees rise whenever demand spikes. Suddenly, normal people, the very ones you claim to protect, can't afford to transact on the network anymore. That forces them into custodial services, which is its own form of centralization. That fundamental disagreement is why the block size wars effectively ended in 2017 with a split. Bitcoin activated SegWit, a software upgrade designed to improve efficiency without raising the base block size, while Bitcoin Cash split off to pursue larger blocks directly, according to historical accounts from Bitcoin Wiki and Jameson Lopp. By refusing to raise that limit, Bitcoin sacrificed its function as peer-to-peer cash. It pivoted from being a payment network for the world to being a high-fee settlement layer, gambling that people would be happy using secondary layers instead of the real thing.
Okay, fast forward to today. What do outcomes suggest about scaling in practice? Small block proponent. If we look at chain activity, does the dominance of the small block chain settle anything, or is there a nuance the numbers miss?
I think the numbers tell a very clear story. We don't have to guess which model the world preferred. We ran a live experiment for 8 years. As of December 22, 2025, Bitcoin processed 418,000 in transactions per day versus Bitcoin Cash's 15,000, significantly outpacing it despite BCH's larger blocks. According to data from BitInfo Charts and Blockchain.com, the market overwhelmingly stayed with the chain that prioritized security over raw capacity. If the main thing holding Bitcoin back was just blocks are too small, then the big block chain should have captured all that user demand. It didn't. It turns out that people value the rock-solid security of the conservative network more than they value cheap block space on a network fewer people verify.
All right, let's make this concrete. Can this stuff work for everyday payments, like buying a coffee or splitting a bill, without being expensive or confusing? Quick definitions. TPS, transactions per second, is a rough way to describe how many payments the base layer can process over time. Lightning Network is that layer on top we've mentioned, where people use channels to move money without writing every step to the main chain. To anchor the scale, Bitcoin's base layer has averaged roughly 5.1 transactions per second recently, constrained by its design. That forces a choice: raise throughput on-chain or push payments to layers. Big Block Proponent, you first. If the goal is normal people making normal payments, what does success look like, and what trade-offs are you willing to accept to get there? Quick definitions. TPS, transactions per second, is a rough way to describe how many payments the base layer can process over time. Lightning Network is that layer on top we've mentioned, where people use channels to move money without writing every step to the main chain. To anchor the scale, Bitcoin's base layer has averaged roughly 5.1 transactions per second recently, constrained by its design. That forces a choice: raise throughput on-chain or push payments to layers. Big Block Proponent, you first. If the goal is normal people making normal payments, what does success look like? And what trade-offs are you willing to accept to get there?
Success means a normal person can pay for coffee without needing a degree in network engineering. It means predictable fees and a simple user experience. You scan, you send, it's done. The problem with that 5.1 TPS limit is that when demand spikes, fees become a bidding war. Bitcoin on-chain fees peaked over $50 in 2021 high-demand periods, dropping to roughly 50 cents to $3 range by late 2024. ycharts/blockchain.com data. That volatility makes everyday use impossible for most of the world. My trade-off is straightforward. I'm willing to raise the block size, which asks a bit more of node operators, to ensure the base layer can handle volume cheaply. While usage is lower, BCH on-chain activity, 0.2 TPS, with about 1 cent fees as of December 2025, BitInfo charts. Lightning, 99% success, MEXC. That comparison matters. On-chain scaling keeps the mental model simple. If you force everyone into layers to dodge fees, you introduce complexity, liquidity, channels, routing, which often pushes people right back into the arms of custodial banks just to make it work.
Small Block Proponent. Let's look at your side's answer to that volatility. Lightning network capacity hit a record high above 5,600 BTC in December 2025. Bitcoin visuals, Amboss data, versus BCH's 19,000 daily TX, BitInfo charts. That growth is real, but does it prove everyday payments are solved, or just that liquidity is parking there?
It proves that the market is actively choosing layers over base layer bloat. Lightning isn't just parking liquidity, it's processing real commerce. As of December 2025, Lightning Network enables everyday transactions at median fees under 1 cent USD, with volumes far exceeding Bitcoin Cash on-chain transaction counts. That volume signal tells me users prefer a secure, conservative base layer with a fast payment rail on top, rather than a simple, big block chain that nobody uses. My opponent calls this complexity, but in technology, we usually call it abstraction. You don't interact with raw TCP/IP packets to watch this video. You use an app that handles the messy parts for you. We are doing the same with money, keeping the base layer boring and secure, like a vault, while wallets handle the instant payments on top.
That sounds great in theory, but let's pressure test the "it just works" claim. Small Block Proponent, say it plainly. Are you comfortable with a world where most daily payments happen on a layer that many users don't fully understand, and where they might end up using custodial wallets just to avoid the headache?
I am comfortable with it, because the alternative is much worse. If we bloat the base layer to chase easy scaling, we make the entire chain so heavy that nobody can verify it except massive data centers. That turns Bitcoin into a corporate service permanently. Forced trust for everyone. With layers, yes, some people will choose custodial wallets for convenience. But the option to run your own node and be your own bank remains open to anyone with a laptop. That ability to opt out of the banking system is the whole point of Bitcoin, and I'm not willing to sacrifice it for a slightly smoother UX today.
Let's talk about decentralization, because in Bitcoin, that's basically joined at the hip with security. A quick definition: a full node is a computer that independently checks every block against the rules, so you don't have to trust anyone else to know what's valid. This matters because if only a few big players can verify the network, It's easier to censor transactions or push bad updates. On the data, Bitcoin has over 24,000 reachable full nodes as of December 22, 2025, according to bitnodes.io and Coindance. Small Block Proponent. When you hear that number, 24,000, what does it represent to you? Is it just a statistic or the main line of defense? A quick definition. A full node is a computer that independently checks every block against the rules, so you don't have to trust anyone else to know what's valid. This matters because if only a few big players can verify the network, it's easier to censor transactions or push bad updates. On the data, Bitcoin has over 24,000 reachable full nodes as of December 22, 2025, according to bitnodes.io and Coindance. Small Block Proponent. When you hear that number, 24,000, what does it represent to you? Is it just a statistic or the main line of defense?
That number represents a high standard of decentralization, and I respect it. Having over 24,000 reachable full nodes is a robust defense against censorship. But the small block argument assumes that raising the block size limit automatically destroys that number, which ignores the engineering reality. We know from the physics that larger blocks require more bandwidth and take longer to propagate across the peer-to-peer network, increasing latency for distant nodes. But we don't have to relay blocks naively. Technologies like compact blocks and graphene reduce propagation times for larger blocks by sending only block skeletons and transaction hashes instead of the full data. So the trade-off isn't small blocks or centralization. It's how good is our relay tech? If we optimize propagation, we can support more on-chain capacity and keep node operation accessible, rather than forcing everyone into custodial layers out of fear.
Wait, let's clarify the physics for listeners. Orphan blocks, aka stale blocks, happen when valid blocks are mined nearly simultaneously. Slower propagation leads to rejection from the main chain. Small Block Proponent. If graphene makes relay fast, why does the stale block risk still worry you?
It worries me because mitigating a problem isn't the same as solving the incentives. Even with smarter relays, larger blocks still generally need more bandwidth and take longer to propagate across a global network. And when propagation slows, even by milliseconds, you increase the pressure to produce stale blocks. That pressure creates a gradient. It rewards the miners who have the absolute fastest connections and the biggest infrastructure, and it punishes smaller, independent players. Over time, that pushes mining towards centralization. I'm not denying that graphene helps. I'm saying the safest place to be conservative is the base layer, because once you tilt the playing field toward professionals, you can't easily undo it.
Fast forward a few years. What's the one metric you'd watch to detect creeping centralization? Big Block Proponent, you first. If bigger blocks win, what number would have to move for you to admit, okay, we went too far?
I'd watch the cost of running a verifying node relative to the median user's hardware. A larger distribution of full nodes enhances Bitcoin's network security by boosting resistance to Sybil attacks and censorship resistance via diverse validation. If raising the block size meant you suddenly needed a $5,000 server instead of a home PC to participate, I'd admit we crossed a line. But right now, we're erring so far on the side of caution that we're creating a different kind of centralization. Intermediary centralization. If the base layer is safe, but the average person accesses it through a custodial wallet because they can't afford the fees or complexity, we haven't won decentralization, we've just outsourced the trust. So the metric isn't just node count, it's what percentage of users hold their own keys.
Before we argue about who wins, we have to define what winning means. Is it cheap everyday payments for everyone? Or is it keeping Bitcoin easy to verify and hard to capture? One reason this fight never dies is that the original creator wasn't allergic to growth. In 2010, Satoshi proposed on Bitcoin Talk that block size limits increase automatically via code at future block heights, e.g., if block number greater 115,000. That doesn't settle today's debate, but it does tell us early Bitcoin wasn't framed as never change anything. So, Big Block Proponent, paint a falsifiable picture of 2030. If your side wins, what does a normal payment look like, and what trade-off did we accept to get there? One reason this fight never dies is that the original creator wasn't allergic to growth. In 2010, Satoshi proposed on Bitcoin Talk that block size limits increase automatically via code at future block heights, e.g., if block number greater 115,000. That doesn't settle today's debate, but it does tell us early Bitcoin wasn't framed as never change anything. So, Big Block Proponent, paint a falsifiable picture of 2030. If your side wins, what does a normal payment look like, and what trade-off did we accept to get there?
If my side wins, the 2030 user experience is boringly simple. You scan a QR code, you pay a few cents, and it settles directly on the blockchain. You don't have to manage channel liquidity or worry about routing failures. It just works, permissionlessly. The trade-off we accepted to get there is that running a node requires a decent internet connection and a modern hard drive, rather than 2015-era hobbyist hardware. We aligned the network with the hardware growth Satoshi Nakamoto indicated would support larger blocks, per Moore's law. Compare that to the alternative. Small block Bitcoin advocates foresee base layer fees surpassing $5 at 2030 peaks, with Layer 2 solutions handling everyday transactions. My worry is that if the base layer costs $5 or $50 to touch, normal people won't move to non-custodial Lightning. They'll just give up and use a centralized custodial bank.
Small Block Proponent, the fee forecast is contested, but the logic isn't. Scarcity raises prices. If base layer fees do get high at peaks, are you comfortable with most people almost never touching the base chain directly?
I am comfortable with that because the base layer is the global court of final settlement, not a coffee receipt ledger. If we try to shove every transaction onto the main chain, we sacrifice the one thing that makes Bitcoin valuable: the ability for anyone to verify the money supply without asking permission. Small block Bitcoin proponents predict that the Lightning Network will enable global-scale growth by 2030 while upholding superior security and decentralization over on-chain block expansions. My opponent calls this complexity, but I call it modular design. We keep the foundation rock solid and do the high-speed commerce on layers above it, where innovation can happen without risking the entire economy.
We're out of time, so here's the takeaway. The small block path optimizes for conservative security and verification, pushing payments to layers. The big block path optimizes for cheap, direct on-chain use, but accepts higher requirements for validation. Both sides are arguing about different kinds of decentralization. I'm Nexus. I'll see you in the next simulation. Good night.